when we can shed light on some self-sabotaging behavior that maybe we've been doing for decades, when we can bring awareness to it and we can create a new path for ourselves and motivation and reasons to get on the new, healthier path, this is empowering. Hi friends, welcome back. Today we're talking about emotional eating and really how do we notice and stop ourselves from using food to fill an emotional need. So I want you to just really let that sink in, this idea of using food to fill an emotional need. So if you're someone like myself who has used food to feel better throughout your life, then there's a varying amount of awareness that we have about the issue, right? And when it starts, we might be pretty disconnected from the fact that we're eating not because we're hungry, but because we want to feel happier, right? And typically there's some kind of stressor that's taken place or that's happened, something we're dealing with that we don't want to deal with in the moment. We need to immediately feel better, get some dopamine, right? Get some carbs and sugar in our system to distract and to numb ourselves to the emotional situation. But it's easy to be pretty unaware of it. And so really, as we talk about this issue and as we talk about, well, how do we start to put an end to using food for emotional needs? The first step is to really try to notice if this is something that you've done, right? And try to notice if maybe it's a pattern. And so one of the tests you can do is as you reach for food, really asking yourself, am I hungry? Or am I trying to feel happier? And so we can see that emotional eating, it is about food, but it's also really not about food. What it's about is trying to regulate our system, right? Trying to feel different, better than we feel right now, distracting ourselves, numbing ourselves to whatever's happening in our life. So really, emotional eating at its core is about our ability to self-regulate. And so when we have an unpleasant emotion come up, or if we have a situation that we don't want to deal with, it's bringing up these feelings of anxiety or just negative emotion. If our solution is to essentially put the situation and the emotion aside, reach for food, eat the food so that we can have our system feel better for a minute before we then have to focus on the problem again, right? Because any of us who have used emotional eating or other substances to feel better and to numb ourselves, one thing we know is that the problem does not go away, right? The problem's still there. Depends on how long you push it off. It's usually also getting worse, right? When we are ignoring an issue, it typically gets bigger. So emotional eating is this unconscious attempt to bring regulation to our dysregulated nervous system and to find a sense of safety. And so that piece, that it's unconscious, it's an unconscious attempt. Because as soon as we notice, I think I'm reaching for this food because I had this unpleasant emotion or this unpleasant thought, or someone texted me something I didn't like, right? Something got dropped in my lap, whether it be just it came up internally or it came from outside that is overwhelming my system right now. And so now I'm going to go and try to get comfort in some food. Bringing awareness to it is really the first step to turning it around, right? And to taking the control back. Now, today we're talking about food and utilizing food as this sort of numbing agent, as this regulating agent, but alcohol, other drugs, other substance, zoning out, watching, a TV show. These are other things that we can do to get the same benefit, right? That to get that easy regulation to our system. But when we continuously do this, it turns into more problems. So with emotional eating, the biggest thing that we worry about is our health, right? Because if we're eating foods that are not good for us, that we're taking in excess calories, it's going to show on our body really quickly. And our doctor's going to tell us, and our blood pressure and our insulin resistance, right? Like there's all of these physical health complications that we experience when food becomes our solution for regulation. So I just want to let that sink in for a second. This has nothing to do with vanity or trying to be a certain size or any of that. Like this is about our health, right? And so when we're bringing in calories that we don't need to help fix an emotional problem, over time, this is going to cause more problems for us in the long run. Very often, when we're utilizing food for comfort and we're turning to emotional eating to help us feel better, most of us at that point are really ignoring our physical body, or we have this disconnection and we're kind of cut off from the physical body. And that's kind of necessary for us to use the body in this way to get comfort, right? Because there's so much wisdom in our body. We have, our body has hormones that are released when we're full that tells us like, hey, you're good. You don't need food. And so when we're turning to food emotionally to help us feel better, we have to ignore that. Right? You have to ignore the signs that your body gives you that you don't need that food, or that maybe that food isn't healthy, isn't going to sit right with you. And so there's this disconnect. And what we often talk about on the show is the need for integration and how integration is really health. And so being tuned into your body and, the wisdom of your gut and the sensations that you have, when we can have a connection with our body and seek that connection with our body, it helps to clear up some of these, unhealthy behaviors such as emotional eating. When we have that connection with our body and we're able to really be integrated in that way, it helps us to avoid maladaptive behaviors like emotional eating, or like, the other vices, alcohol. I know that that's something I've talked about many times on the show, about how for me, it became having some wine after work, and how if something upsetting came up, it would be like, oh, let's turn to alcohol or let's turn to food. And so there's this huge shift in your thinking when you decide, like, I'm not going to go for these outside substances anymore. I'm going to build up a tolerance for dealing with unpleasant emotions, unpleasant situations, unpleasant people, disappointments. There's all of these things that happen in life that are unpleasant. And so we can be the type of person who seeks comfort in food, alcohol, drugs, TV, unhealthy behaviors to numb and to distract us from this unpleasant whatever that's landed in our lap. Or we can become the type of person that faces it head on, knowing I can handle it. I can handle an unpleasant emotion when it comes up. I know that emotions are like a wave. They're going to peak and then they're going to recede, right? I know that I've created enough connection within my system to handle any unpleasant emotion. The emotions are not bigger than me. And same with a difficult situation with a relationship or with life. When we have this integration in our system and we have this faith that we can handle things, which we can only get there by consistently facing things and then building a track record with ourselves that, oh, look, I didn't have to go eat a bunch of ice cream or drink some wine. I sat with this and I moved through it. And now I'm able to take some action. And this is a really empowering message. This is a very empowering place to be when you realize you can put down these vices and you can be better for it. So how do we learn to build up a tolerance for uncomfortable emotions? I've got some steps for us. So the first one is to practice being present, right? And so if you think about it, when we emotionally eat or when we drink or when we take drugs or substance to take us away from what we're dealing with it, that's like the opposite of being present in the moment, aware, mindful, right? Taking in what's happening, whether it be coming up inside or coming from the outside, right? Making a practice of being present. So as we do this, as we build up a tolerance for sitting with the present moment, we start to build a track record with ourselves where we see our ability increases and our confidence in our ability to handle whatever happens continues to increase. And as you do it, you also realize, like, gosh, I'm not having all the downsides of the vices that I used to turn to. And so there's a double reason for us to stick with this. And it's interesting to think of, uncomfortable emotions almost like a monster under the bed. Like if you were little and you thought, there's a monster in your closet or there's a monster under the bed, and the lights get turned on and you look in the closet, you look under the bed and like, oh, it was like a pair of shoes or it was a jacket that was hanging there, right? Things become clear and we realize like, gosh, when I was trying to avoid it, I thought it was this big scary monster. But when I turn the lights on and I just face it, it's really not that bad. And that's the interesting thing about emotions, is that as we build our tolerance for sitting with the whole range of emotions, and specifically uncomfortable emotions, where our instinct, right? Like just that instinct is like, I can't deal with this. This is going to be so terrible, right? But the more that we just face it, turn the lights on, picture it like it is a fake monster under the bed, and test yourself. Like, can I just sit with this? And what we find is that emotions don't last very long when we're not trying to retract away from them, when we're just sitting there. It comes like a wave, and then you realize like that wasn't so bad. And then after time, you even get to a place where you're like, I can't believe that situation would have sent me, drinking a bottle of wine or eating a pint of ice cream. Like, that wasn't that bad. So the next step after, just getting this tolerance for the present moment is the concept of acceptance. And so really accepting whatever is happening in the present moment, whatever emotions are coming up, whatever thoughts are in your mind, having this attitude of just like arms open, like acceptance, not judging, not building it up to be something bigger than it is, something that you think you can't handle, just sitting with what it is in acceptance and finding how it's so much simpler than we think it's going to be. As you're accepting the emotion or the thought or the difficult situation, keeping in mind that it's going to pass. And it's going to pass rather quickly, right? When we aren't contracting away from something, when we're just open to it and accepting it, it can pass through very quickly. Okay, so the next step here in really helping us to tolerate unpleasant emotions is to make that distinction between you, the observer, and that unpleasant emotion, that unpleasant thought, or whatever it is that you're dealing with, right? Making that separation and realizing I'm the observer of this. I know that I can sit with it. I can tolerate it. I can accept it, knowing it's going to shift, it's going to change. It's not going to be here forever. And it's not me, right? And it may sound obvious, but for anyone who's ever felt very overwhelmed by negative emotions or very just taken over by thoughts or emotions, it's a pretty big step to separate yourself from the emotion. Like, I can notice that this big unpleasant emotion is coming up. I know that I have the capacity to sit with it. I know it's going to pass. And I know I'm not it. It's this thing that's passing through. And it's a really powerful exercise to continuously put yourself in the seat of the observer and knowing that you're not it. You are experiencing it. You are experiencing this moment, and this moment will pass. The next step is really knowing what's important to you. So whenever we have been using something as a way to maybe avoid unpleasant emotions like emotional eating or drinking that wine or whatever it might be for you, your avoidance, your numbing factor, notice how it impacts your goals and your values, right? And so using emotional eating as our example, if your value is that you take care of your body, you prioritize your health, and that you have intentions for longevity to be around for your friends and family for the long term, then emotionally eating foods that are highly processed or filled with sugar or just are extra calories that you really don't need, that goes against your value of taking care of your health and taking care of this vessel that you reside in. And so finding and defining what are these values, what are these pillars of values that you have, that you're sure of. And if the vice is really going against your value, then this is a place where knowing what's important to you is really going to help give you that motivation and that reason to sit there and experience the negative emotion and build that container of tolerance so that you no longer have to do this vice that's really working against your values, working against what's most important to you. So let's define it. What's important to you? What are your values? Okay, and the last step here to really helping us build this tolerance and build this ability to turn away from the emotional eating or whatever the vice is that's really dragging you down is to commit to take action. So we've, become acquainted with the present moment and got comfortable with our ability to be mindful. We have learned acceptance, right? We've learned to open our arms to thoughts, feelings, experiences, knowing we can handle it, knowing it will pass. And then we distinguished between us, the observer, and the thought, the emotion, the experience that's happening. We defined our values. Hey, my values say that I'm going to take care of my body, and I have really important reasons why I'm going to take care of my body. And so now the final thing is really let's commit to taking action. And this might be a step where you want to bring in some accountability with somebody or just identify different practices that you need to put in place to help you stay the course to be true to your values. So if this is all about emotional eating, then maybe one of the actions that you're going to commit to is a food journal. And so with this food journal, you would just be jotting down what you're eating, when you're eating it, and really why you're eating it. And this helps you to really stay in the present moment and make contact with what am I doing right now? Like if I'm eating and it's after dinner and I really met my macros for the day and I started to reach for something, but I got to put it down and I have to put why, this gives you a moment to reflect. Oh, it's because I just got that text from so-and-so and it brought up these icky feelings, right? And it gives you the opportunity to sit with it and to notice it and to increased your tolerance for these uncomfortable emotions, reminds you of your values. Your value is of your health, and then allows you to make a different choice. So this is all very empowering at the end of the day when we can shed light on some self-sabotaging behavior that maybe we've been doing for decades, when we can bring awareness to it and we can create a new path for ourselves and motivation and reasons to get on the new, healthier path. This is empowering. This is exciting. So I hope if emotional eating is something that you have dabbled with or struggled with in your life, I hope that this has given you some insight as to maybe why you've been doing it, and also a path forward if you choose to move through it, right? And you allow yourself to build that tolerance for uncomfortable emotions and feel how empowered and confident you are on the other side when you realize, I can deal with anything. I can handle anything. I have the ability to separate myself from it and to experience it and to watch it come and go. And I don't need to reach for food or alcohol or some kind of numbing agent to get me through it. That is true self-development, and that is what I hope we can all achieve. So thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe, and I will be back next week with another message. Take care.